think in the IT space, we're sort of always used to thinking about the confidentiality, integrity, authenticity that actually people's lives depend on. Availability really is a critical property of those systems. And I think managing migration in systems that have to be always online is an interesting challenge.
Welcome to Shielded, the last line of cyber defense by PQ Shield, the podcast where we are moving the conversation around post-quantum cryptography from the why to the how. I'm Joe Linson, your host, and I'm here to guide you through the challenges, innovations, and solutions that will help your organization stay secure in the quantum era. Let's future-proof your defenses together.
Today on Shielded, the last line of cyber defense, we are joined by Jeremy B., Principal Technical Director for Cryptography and High Threat Technologies at the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, or NCSC for short. Jeremy is the author of the recently published NCSC guidance document, Timelines for Migration to Post-Quantum Cryptography, a critical roadmap designed to help UK organizations navigate the complex journey of migrating to quantum-safe security. Under Jeremy's leadership, the NCSC has taken a distinctly pragmatic approach, emphasizing readiness and technology availability over waiting for the advent of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, or CRQC. Jeremy will share insights into the UK government's strategy, the role of NCSC within the broader government framework, and practical advice for organizations starting or progressing their PQC migration journey. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us on Shielded today.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, very nice to meet you. Now, Jeremy, they say not all who wander are lost, and I believe you are someone who enjoys long walks in the forest, enjoying calm and grounding effect that nature has on us humans. The Japanese actually have made it into a mind and purposeful practice, called it Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. From your perspective, how does a long walk in the forest help to clean your mind?
Oh, that's an interesting first question. I think all of us, when we are sort of concentrating on hard problems, whether they're technical ones or otherwise, sometimes need to engage the subconscious to come up with good ideas. And I think the sort of ability to have that time away from the desk, time away from the laptop, and time to think about other things when your subconscious is doing the job it's there to do is always valuable.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. And thanks for sharing that. And of course, even though I said not all who wander are lost, but some who wander are actually lost. And they might get lost in the forest, so they have a dire need for some guidance, a little bit like organizations feeling lost in their journey towards quantum safety. So maybe to start us off, Jeremy, maybe you could share a bit about your role at the NCSC and how you came to lead the development of the UK's timeline for the migration to post-quantum cryptography.
Yeah, so maybe for some of the listeners to this who are less aware of who NCSC are, I'll sort of give a quick intro to who we are and what we do, and then talk about my role there. So we're the UK government's National Technical Authority for Cybersecurity, so National Cybersecurity Centre. And we sort of exercise that in a few different ways. Primarily, we give advice and guidance often on our website, sometimes direct consultancy, maybe to other parts of government or to some sort of key organisations in regulated sectors. So we're not a policy-making part of government, but we give support to those policy-making departments, we give support to regulators, and sometimes, and particularly as we move more towards the sort of defence and the national security space, we sort of set up a little bit more direct direction or set standards. So my role here is heading up our cryptography area, and that means a few different things. Firstly, it's making sure we are confident in the cryptography that we deploy for our most sensitive systems in the UK. So sort of a very detailed assessment, assurance of cryptography and its implementations. And that's backed up by research expertise in maths, in software, in hardware, effectively all the things that contribute to designing, a number of the things that contribute to designing secure systems. But also we advise much more widely on the use of cryptography, so use of cryptography in government, in regulated sectors, and for the general public. And it's in that context that we published our most recent guidance on migration timelines for PQC.
Right, right. Now, from a timing perspective, are there any main motivations you think that behind the timing to release this guidance right now?
Yeah, a few different ones. So from our point of view, our history in PQC is quite long. I think the first time we published anything on it was in about 2016, around about the time that NIST was starting its work. And you're sort of updating that in 2020, and that was signalling a general direction of travel towards PQC and some general principles around waiting for standards to be finalised, waiting for reliable implementations of those standards. Now, of course, we have the algorithm standards. We have some of the early and quite a large number of early certified implementations of those algorithms and cryptographic modules. The work that's happening in other standards organizations defining protocols that use PQC is advancing well. So we're at the point now where all the things that we've sort of said were preconditions for migration to PQC have been met or are being met. But on top of this, in the UK government, much as in other places, our policymakers need to understand what migration to PQC might involve. Our regulators look to us not to set their policy for them, but to provide some of that sort of underpinning information that they rely on when they'll start to set direction for their sectors. So really, we're at a point where our preconditions for PQC migration were in place, and the need across the UK for was there. So publishing now.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, looking at some of the migration guidances in comparing it to the UK's approach, I feel there's a much more heavy focus on technology availability and organizational readiness. And your explanation about timing really underscores that also. Rather than, again, waiting for CRQC, cryptographically relevant quantum computer, to appear on the scene. So maybe you can speak a little bit about the reasoning behind choosing that path, and why it differs slightly from some of the other guidances that we see globally.
Yeah, I can do that. Obviously, we all know no one producing guidance is waiting for a CRQC to appear, but it's certainly true that prediction of that is hard, right? So nonetheless, but the threat's a real one. We see roadmaps from the major quantum computing industry developers, and where maybe a decade ago those roadmaps would perhaps feel more aspirational, we're now clearly starting to see companies hit their milestones, with a bit of variation, because of course there is.
Yeah, just that latest Google announcement over the last couple of days really pinpoints that as well. Yeah.
So as we're seeing those companies hit their milestones, we view the threat as a real one, but the ability to predict exactly when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer will arrive is too difficult to do precisely. There's enough sort of breakthroughs that, maybe little, maybe big breakthroughs that need to happen. Identify exactly when they will happen it's hard to do. The thing we do have certainty about is, almost going back to the previous part, it's the existence of standards, the existence of implementations of those standards. So, our view was that what we really want to do is pitch the migration to PQC as a technology, a very large scale, global scale technology change program. And that's a thing that most organizations know how to do and have some experience of. So really, that's what we did in our guidance. We sort of broke down what are those sort of technology change steps that we need to do. Define our end states, do the discovery, the planning, work out what your strategy is going to be for each system you care about, then build your actual implementation plan and carry it out and refine it as you go along. And so that's the sort of the engineering first approach. And then alongside that, we've looked a little bit further ahead. Yeah, we've made some predictions on how we see the standards evolving, both the stuff we know that will happen near term and the stuff that we think will take a little bit longer. And that breaks us down into, sort of three sensible chunks of work. There's 2 to 3 years for that planning, discovery and planning work. Takes us to a 2028 milestone. And at that point, you've done the work that lets you migrate the high priority stuff and the easier stuff. And then as the more complex or more esoteric standards, or things like Web PKI, which is a difficult problem, as the standards for those evolve, refining the plan and continuing through to 2035. So we've taken an approach that, well, I don't know how different it is to what other nations have done. I mean, we've articulated it in our guidance. I'm sure similar thinking will have been going on elsewhere, but I think there's a point in time in which we had enough evidence, enough data that we could actually sort of expose the thinking as well as the conclusion. So that's what we've done here. Our sort of end date of 2035 doesn't look significantly different to most other most other guidance.
It seems that most of those timelines somewhat align in the dates that are being spelled out. Now I think one of the topics that you mentioned early on is that NCSC as an organization is not the policymaker within the UK government. Your real role really is in is in advising and sharing those best practices and guidelines. But you as an organization cannot enforce policies necessarily. So how would you say does this advisory role shape how you engage with industry and government sectors, and how can you engage or encourage adoption without formally being able to enforce?
Yeah, and this is I guess it's a complex problem, and the answer is definitely not a static one. It's still something we're sort of evolving with the rest of government. So I say, whilst we are not policy making, we do work very closely with the departments that do. So we have within NCSC we have teams responsible for each of the major critical national infrastructure sectors. Examples being finance, telecoms, energy, transport, and others. So we have plans where we work with the lead government departments for each of those sectors. That's typically cohered through our department we call DSIT. So that's our Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. So we have those very close links with the policy-making parts of government. We also do have various cyber risk frameworks that we can sort of input to. So we have our cyber assessment framework, which is a tool for assessing cyber resilience, which is obviously quite a key topic in the UK at the moment. And there will be plans over the next few years to work out how we sort of get the right levers into that, or the right references to PQC in that. So it's as much as anything, it's not using formal enforcement, but it is thinking about the levers we have to sort of insert references to PQC in the right regulatory and right policy making places. And alongside that, as I said, this isn't sort of a static way of working. We said we continuously work with representatives of sectors, and I think we are continuously finding out what they're going to find hard. That will differ from sector to sector. What blockers they have, what the right comms are, what the right communications are. What are the messages that will hit boards and CISOs? And I think that's something that often gets lost. It's something we put quite a strong focus on at NCSC. Is what are the right outward comms for landing cybersecurity messages? Because without that, we're just publishing technical positions. And
right, yeah. One would expect that an approach in those critical national infrastructure sectors is going to look quite different between, say, an energy provider and a financial services provider. Right? They might have,
and it's that distinction between organisations that primarily use enterprise IT, or at least something quite close to enterprise IT, and those that have much more physical infrastructure, bespoke physical infrastructure, and using more sort of the operational technology protocols, where I think in those cases we do expect the standards to evolve a little more slowly, but some of the hardware infrastructure doesn't get replaced very often, and finding the right times to get into their normal upgrade and investment cycles. And I think that's a really key point here. This isn't really a cryptographic change; it's a cybersecurity uplift. And as a cybersecurity agency, our job is to drive down cyber risk, and cryptography is a key part of that. It's not.
Yeah. So you have this monumental task ahead of you of convincing the operational technology folks that a patch is actually a good thing. They shouldn't be afraid of it.
Well, it's difficult because there is. Yeah, I think in the IT space, we're sort of always used to thinking about the confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, but actually for services that. Yeah, and sometimes in the health sector, we've got services that actually people's lives depend on. Availability really is a critical property of those systems, and I think managing migration in systems that have to be always online is an interesting challenge.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, the availability aspect of it, and then of course also looking at the evolving, privacy regulations that are mostly coming out of the EU. They certainly also give that privacy aspect to that whole discussion. It's yet another direction that I'm sure you get dragged into at times. So I think listening to you, it sounds like a lot of the work that you do and your team that NCSC puts into this is really only possible by collaborating across the different arms of government, but also collaborating with industry. So maybe there's an example that you can think of where you can share some of the best practices, some of the things that have been successful within those collaboration efforts.
Where we've got real value, I think, is from having conversations with sort of small numbers of companies within particular sectors, and trying to. Well, I think one of the things we need to happen is to have sectors sort of moving as one as far as possible. So, for example, if the finance sector are broadly all moving in this, innovate in a somewhat concerted way, if the telecom sector are all moving in a broadly concerted way, and same for all other sectors. And I think the real value we've had from some of those conversations is encouraging transparency. So we have commitment from good numbers of CISOs across some of those critical sectors to share their experiences in migration, what's worked for them, what's been difficult, what hasn't worked. And I think that transparency is really, really important. I think and it's not true to say everyone recognises the importance, but certainly there are significant numbers of industry leaders who recognise this as not a competitive function, but as a collaborative one. And the more we can sort of bring that message across and encourage transparency, the better. And I think getting that commitment from numbers of industry leaders has been really valuable.
Yeah, I feel like that has been discussed a lot within that context of PQC migration is collaboration and transparency throughout that supply chain where and
that supply chain is a really good point because obviously in many sectors the base set of suppliers is not huge. It's broadly the same sort of underpinning technologies that rely on. Getting that sort of coherence matters.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you're also NCSC and you're also moving even further in that direction of sort of creating the foundations for collaboration and transparency. And I think besides the guidance that you just released, there's a new program that you're in the final stages also in preparing to help give sort of a judgment on how good of an advice and guidance on PQC migration certain consulting firms can give. Is that maybe you want to speak about that program a little bit as well?
Yeah, so I think we sort of identified that, and there's a few dependencies or that a smooth migration in the UK or anywhere has. Some of it is the availability of the technology, some of it's the planning and preparation, but underpinning that there is a need to make sure that companies, government can access the right skills, that there is a skilled industry base who can consult, who can help with migration. We have run and still do run a number of industry assurance schemes, where we assure companies, they get the sort of the NCSC stamp, and they can offer consultancy, and buyers will have some level of confidence that that they're getting good advice from companies that have got sort of clear training programs, clear skills base, clear repeatable consultancy methodology, and so on. So what we're doing is adding a PQC refinement to that. So I think the existing schemes cover things like security, architecture, and risk. There is an argument that in 5 years' time, the work needed to do migration to PQC is just a refinement of security architecture. I don't know. I'm sort of speculating a bit into the future, but we're definitely not there at the moment. There is a need for companies to have access to consultancies with expertise in PQC. So we'll be launching that scheme in the next few days, possibly by the time this podcast goes live. And the idea is we'll recognise those companies who can give the right support to PQC migration in a number of different ways, but the early focus is on that planning and discovery, cryptographic discovery stages, and that can be taking an architectural top-down approach. There'll be companies that have a more low-level tool-driven approach. In practice, I think we think everything between those two extremes has the potential to add value. So we'll be bringing the first cohort on board by mid-August, and the hope, I think, it'll be an 18-month pilot, and with the chance for at least one more cohort of companies coming onto during that pilot, and then at the end of that, the intent is that we have a stable scheme that will grow and almost incentivize larger consultancies to build cryptographic expertise within them, and it'll encourage and give, hopefully the intention is to give lines of work to smaller or more bespoke consultancies.
Yeah, and like you said, besides the need to migrate towards quantum safe algorithms, it's going to be a very positive thing to have a broader knowledge of cryptography and key management capabilities within really any organization. You also bring up risk, and assessment of risk is, of course, an important driver in all of this. We often hear that communicating risks specific to an organization and thereby achieving an internal buy-in and C-level support, oftentimes that can be quite challenging. Do you have any recommendations how organizations can communicate successfully the urgency of that said migration internally, to your point of the quantum computer being always something of the future topic?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, our timelines help, but they're not a direct articulation of risk. They are an articulation of how one manages the risk. One of the ways I like to pitch this is that if the migration happens well, or it's not even if it happens well, migration is happening. The major technology vendors all have their implementations of PQC. It's all appearing. It's appearing, across major platforms. In some numbers of years' time, then classical public key cryptography will effectively become a legacy technology. So, if we're pitching in the language of risk to boards, I think the risk isn't a quantum computer will be here in year end, and there's a risk to you there. It is that without action, they'll run the risk of holding substantial legacy IT estates, and that's that's a framing that I think is much more widely understood. And I guess and legacy risk both comes from technology that may become increasingly unsupported, but it also comes from the additional complexity you have of running sort of newer older systems alongside each other in tandem, integrating with one another. So as an approach to manage legacy, manage complexity, that seems to be a stronger line than what's going to happen to my data in year end.
Right. Yeah. It's a different way of framing that conversation, and that's certainly going to help in creating this collaboration that is needed within organizations, and as much as outside within those industries that you mentioned. What also talking about the most common challenges and misconceptions from your perspective, what are the most common misconceptions organizations face when you talk to them about the migration? And I'm sure there's something in your guidance that aims to address those misconceptions as well.
Yeah, so there are a few. I've alluded to one of them, I think, quite a lot already, which is if you view it as just a cryptography problem, then the migration is probably not going to be an enormous success. And that is both a risk for organizations, but actually cryptography is not widely understood. And so by sort of almost highlighting that message and again bringing it back to the cybersecurity domain rather than the cryptography one, I think that helps a lot of organizations sort of reason about the problem. So I think any approach that says that, well, and this is how a lot of companies we talk to, particularly smaller ones, initially think about that they have to understand exactly where every cryptographic element is in every device in their system. That's something we like to get past. We still, I think, need to continue to reinforce the idea that the threat right now is only in asymmetric cryptography, and that we still see the W key length recommendation elsewhere for symmetric cryptography. That's not our position. Our position is that the machinery around things like Rover's algorithm is substantial, and that symmetric cryptography is broadly, in the near term at least, not a priority. That's not something that's written into our timeline's most recent guidance, but it is in the technical guidance from 2024. I guess they're the two biggest things. It's not viewing it as a cryptography first problem, I think is the least helpful thing a company could do, and just trying to bend back round to the language of cyber risk.
So given that, of course, the PQ migration is going to be a multi-year effort. Of course, you did mention a lot of legacy infrastructure. There's the supply chain dependencies, of course. So to get started, if I'm a technical decision maker, how do I prioritize my initial steps for the first 12 to maybe 24 months?
Yes. So this really does come directly from thinking about the technology change program. So that starting out with actually just defining what a good end state looks like. But we'll sort of assume that's been done. It's not trivial, but it's certainly not 12 to 24 months of work. But I think the focus on the discovery and the decision-making part. So understanding what your critical systems are, who the suppliers are for those systems, what's your supply chain, which ones are you responsible for managing and owning. And for many organizations, that'll be none of them. But for critical infrastructure, it's often quite a lot more. Understanding the data you hold and its value to you, how it's processed, how it's stored. And then understanding where you've got sort of some of those longer-lived roots of trust. So, but I think that system first view is the right starting point. Just making sure people have a really clear view of their priority systems and effectively how they operate. So, do they have clear architecture? Architecture diagrams, architecture records. Do they have good plans for managing their suppliers? Do they understand what data they hold and they owe and what the value and they own and what value it is to them.
Yeah. I think that understanding is a quite important moment in many of those early stages of the project. Like you said, you go in and you analyze, you find all your cryptographic assets, and then you find out that you can't really directly influence any of them, and, and, and you end up, needing to speak to your vendors about it, and hopefully you haven't just bought, a bunch of new products that don't yet have support for PQC, but will be used by your organization for the next 5 to 10 or 15 years, depending on which industry vertical you're in.
Yeah, but you're right about that understanding of the vendors, and I think there's opportunity now to really use the discovery work almost to put those really clear expectations on the vendors. So it's not just understanding who your suppliers are, but understanding what their plans are, and working out can you and certainly, I mean, individual companies may not be able to directly affect how an individual supplier plans their migration, but groups of companies within the sector certainly can. So it's almost again, this speaks to sort of everyone in the sector trying to move at once. I think that sort of uplifts the suppliers at the same time as it uplifts the sectors.
Yeah, and then I think if we tie the duration of such a program, if we tie that into the cost that it's going to be for organizations and the budgets that are going to be required. Have you seen any approaches in sort of using the framing as a technology change program rather than a cryptographic migration to be able to tap into available budgets?
Yeah, I mean, tapping into available budgets, I think, is always something that's very organization dependent, but certainly the opposite of that. Trying to drive a cryptography program independently of a broader technology refresh program isn't going to work, because that's effectively asking for two sets of investment. So looking for those opportunities on when you have a technical refresh plan, particularly for the long-lived stuff. I think that has to be critical, because without that, I think the market incentives won't work.
And that then, of course, is again probably best achieved by talking closely to your vendors that you identify as critical within your environment to be able to understand their roadmaps and how they think about this whole complex topic. Right. Now you've already alluded to this a little bit, but I would have ask the specific question still. Sort of looking ahead, and I know that's always tough, right? But just over the next 5 to 10 years, which is sort of aligns with the timeline that your guidance spells out. What do you envision the ecosystem is going to look like globally, and what role do you think the UK will be playing on the international stage and in shaping those standards, policies, and also really technologies in the end?
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, I think in our guidance, we do talk a little bit about how we see the ecosystem evolving, at least over the next 5 years. And then beyond that, I think there is obviously the work that CAs will be doing, which I think is complex. I think the UK does have a really strong industry and academic base in cryptography. I think we're really well placed. We have companies and individuals who've been heavily involved in various standardization and technical development activities. Yeah, and it's that's something I think we've been consistently good at over a long period of time, and expect that to continue. So if we think about standards in particular, so we as NCSC, we are involved in a number of bodies, particularly IETF and ETSI, and some other standards organizations. And again, this continues. Our focus has been on really been on that sort of cryptography as part of cyber risk management. So, what can stand, how can we contribute, I guess, to standard activities that talk a little bit about implementations and managing that threat. So an example is the work in IETF on hybrid definitions. Yeah, so some time ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, 2-3 years ago maybe, we sort of recognised that there was something of a confusion in terminology around the definition of a hybrid, and so a couple of our folk put together a hybrid terminology draft, which in itself doesn't sound like it's technically groundbreaking, but what it does do is remove confusion when people start speaking the same language to each other, and it removes that confusion and just sort of contributes in some small way to that sort of stable technical base. And I think those places where we can have that type of influence and contribute, I think will continue to be important to us.
Yeah, helping to build that foundation for collaboration to have, like you said, for everyone to use the same terminology and actually speaking about the same thing in the end, using the identical terms. Now, before we wrap up, Jeremy, first off, this has been a great discussion. Thanks so much for sharing all your insights. Where can our listeners follow your work and find out a bit more about what we talked about? Maybe download the guidance.
Yes. So you can find all of this on our website. So that's ncsc.gov.uk. If you search NCSC PQC timelines, it should come top of the hit list. And on our website, it has a lot more information. So you'll be able to find when it's launched our Azure Consultancy scheme on there. You'll be able to find, in fact, linked from our timelines guidance as some of our earlier technical papers on PQC. Unrelated to this topic, but interesting nonetheless, we recently published a white paper on advanced cryptography, so techniques built on homomorphic encryption and similar. There's a range of publications that sort of this audience might be interested in. So have a browse.
Yeah, that's sort of the next thing that lies ahead, like the homomorphic and fully homomorphic encryption. All the fine things that are going to come out of that. No, any last words of advice? Anything that we haven't touched upon that you were hoping to?
I think I'd probably just reinforce the sort of the working good general cyber practice help. So we've talked a lot about managing supply chains, but actually all the other sort of routine things, asset management, having the right processes for patching, for updating, for many organizations, they will be the things that give you a secure migration. I think we've talked a lot about the advice that works, that's important for government, is important for critical sectors, and important for those large organizations or organizations that manage some of their own infrastructure. But for many SMEs, and many sort of conventional commercial businesses, migration is something that will, broadly speaking, and there's a few caveats in there, but broadly be delivered by service providers. So just making sure that you carry out good cyber hygiene, good cyber practice. It's probably the best thing that I guess everybody should be doing.
Yeah, I think for those organizations that rely, almost 100% on their vendors, on their supply chain, and certainly your guidance can help in asking the right questions in the right way to their vendors, right? So they know what to pinpoint. That's great. Well, thanks again, Jeremy, for joining today. I very much enjoyed the conversation.
The quantum era is already here. With the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right mindset, together we can face it head on. To find out more about PQ Shield and how our cutting-edge solutions can help you secure your data against the quantum threat, visit pqshield.com. Make sure to search for Shielded, the last line of cyber defense, in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team here at PQ Shield, thanks for listening.